Hello, my name's Rob and welcome to Swift Slots, and welcome to part 3 of my Tamiya 1/24th scale Lancia Stratos turbo build. So in part 2 we got the chassis fully finished, including the working steering, and in this part 3 we're going to be taking this beautiful body, getting a livery on it, getting it all mounted to the chassis and then running it round the track to see what she looks like. So let's hit the spray booth and get started. Okay, so while I give that body 3 days to dry, because I've got a lot of really heavy masking on it and I want it completely bone dry, I'm going to turn my attentions to this back wheel. Now, I'm not all that happy with it. I know your eye is probably distracted by the paint moving all over the place, but the wheel itself is not really very round. I did try and put the brass insert into the wheel and this aluminium overlay over the top of the wheel itself. And it works in as much as it goes on the axle, but I'm not overly happy with how square it is on the axle. It could be better. I don't know if it's actually coming through on camera, whether that you can see that wobble in the wheel, more if you look here. But there is a slight wobble. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out everything in the back of the wheel. I'm going to strip everything out the wheel completely, including the plastic hub that the wheel came on, to just leave the outer rim and the fascia. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to turn up this brass bar and I'm going to fit it completely into that wheel in its entirety, and I'm going to machine back this boss and drill it in. So what then will happen is the outside of this rod or this bar will actually determine how true this wheel runs, because this will just slide straight into the inside of the whole wheel, and then the wheel will become effectively just a skin over an alloy insert effectively, rather than trying to use the boss of the original wheel, which in fairness wasn't all that straight. And it doesn't really matter from a visual perspective, because as you can see inside there where the brake disc is supposed to be and my aluminium insert is now replacing the brake disc, you can't see any of the wheel on the outside inside the spoke. And that's how it was with the Tamiya plastic brake insert anyway, that you'd have painted silver. So replacing the whole internal with this won't make any difference at all, but it will make the wheel run a hell of a lot truer. And I can just, as I've already done here on the lathe before I actually mounted the tyre, I took a slight cut because you can see how uneven the wheel was just by that witness mark of the white plastic against the orange paint. So once this insert is made and pushed in, I should be able to take a nice clean cut right across that wheel and make it truly round, and then we'll end up with a nice pair of very, very true running back wheels. So let's crack on with that while the paint's drying. And there we go. That's the finished insert, all made up and pushed into the back of the standard kit wheel. And there you can see the M2.5 all ready to go, and you can see the contact patch that I've now got all around the wheel is an awful lot nicer than it was originally. There's a little bit of a low spot here, that's just part of it. It's not going to be a problem, but it's an awful lot better than it was. So there is the inside of the wheel, and you can still see the brake disc, and there is the original rotor that was supposed to go with the kit. So you can see that the original rotor is just as big as what I've put in there anyway. So the look of the kit is totally unchanged from what it should be. So let's get these wheels on this chassis, and that'll button up the chassis. And there it is, all done. Now I know it's going to be slightly difficult to see, but if I rotate this wheel here and put my finger at the tip, you should see that that wheel is running an awful lot more true than it was. And the same for the other side as well. If I put my thumb there, you should be able to see that it's running an awful lot straighter. And if I put some power to the back end as well, you should be able to see that it runs quite a bit nicer. There's no discernible wobble in those wheels at all. I know there's an ever so slightly low spot here and over here, that's just part of the wheel, but you should be able to see the wheels in general run a lot straighter than they used to. So that's the chassis all done. Let's get back to the bodywork. Okay, so that rather complicated piece of masking turned out rather well in the end. I'm very pleased with it. I was very, very nervous about masking off this, and I really did think that I was going to get it wrong and I was going to line myself up for a lot of problems. But actually now it's done, I'm actually very pleased with it. I've actually had a lot less problems masking this up than I did the Marlboro colours on my McLaren, funnily enough. Maybe because I tried a bit harder, I don't know. But basically what I did is I cut my Tamiya masking tape into 1mm strips with a brand new blade, and then laid all the masking down, and then went louver by louver and with my 20 times loop, pushing every single piece of tape into the louver line, louver by louver, and working my way down to make sure that the next louver didn't pull the masking up from the one previously. So once I'd got all my masking in place, I then put my masking tape either side of my Tamiya tape, but I left a very, very slight gap, and over the top of that gap I put a liquid mask. Now the reason for that is because it's very difficult to mask a masking line on top of a really thin masking line and still keep a really good seal. So I didn't even bother. So if you put a tape by the side of it and run your liquid mask over the joint, that will seal the joint perfectly. So when you take it all off, you get a really clean line. And you did see, perhaps, when I peeled off for the red for the last time, you would see a little bit of liquid mask still caught in these louvers here and there. Now that's good, because if the liquid mask wasn't there, that would have been overspray, which would have been a big problem. So by putting the liquid mask in there, it really helps the situation. So what I did also, when I mixed up my paint, I used rapid thinner and sprayed the paint down at about 8 psi, which is incredibly low. The reason being is I didn't want to blow any paint underneath the masking tape if it wasn't quite pushed all the way down, and using rapid thinner evaporates it off really quickly. So you're spraying a very little bit of paint mixed with rapid thinner at very, very low pressure, and you just dust it over until you get the coverage that you want, and just go slowly. So the colour that I ended up using wasn't actually the Tamiya paint. Now I find Tamiya paint to be quite thick, not thick in its context, but it has like a plasticky body to it, and it's got like a very tangible thickness. So when you lay it down, it lays down great. I mean, these wheels are done with it and it's great. But I find that you can't really mask really sharp, fine lines like this with the Tamiya tape without it peeling when you pull it off. It's only fractions, but obviously with this paint being so sharp, fractions matter. And I always find that the Mr. Colour paint, you can put it down, not thick, but you can put it down nicely and get a colour that you want quickly, and then let it evaporate off and then peel off the tape, and you always get a clean line. I don't find the Mr. Colour stuff pulls up with the tape, whereas I do find that with Tamiya. Also, this paint is a little bit thin. It's not very thin, but it's with the Mr. Colour, you lay it down and it gives a real good solid colour instantly. The pigments are very, very strong. Don't find so much with the Tamiya, and also the pigments are quite, like I say, a bit plasticky and a little bit heavy. So it's, when you peel off, I don't find that it's as nice. The matte colours are really good. I find the gloss is a little bit thick, and I got a little bit worried about using this over such a really intricate part. So I ended up not using the Tamiya. Also, I wanted to try and get a slightly more red hue on the car with the slightly more orangey hue on the wheels, because that does seem to be how the Alitalia colours are. So the way that I got this version of Alitalia using the Mr. Colour paints was, I've got green out there, that's not the right colour. So the actual colour I did use, not the green, was the Mr. Colour 173 fluorescent orange, and I used 10 parts of that to 8 parts of Mr. Colour number 3 red. So that's the mix, and I ended up with this pot here, which I've put in an old used Mr. Colour empty jar, and I ended up with that colour there, which is remarkably similar to the Tamiya LP50, only slightly redder with a slightly less orange hue. So the colour on the body pops a little bit more than a standard red, but it's still more red than the wheels, which are slightly more orange. So that's how I got the colours. Anyway, with that done, we can now mask off the rest of the green and the red, spray all the rest of it. It's all easy from here on in, and then we can move on to putting the decals on.
One eternity later.
Okay, I'm not going to lie to you, I've had to do this masking over the course of about 3 days because it's extremely intricate and requires an awful lot of concentration and thought to make sure that all of these lines all end up exactly where they're supposed to be. And I do it using 2 aids. One of those aids is my 20 times jeweler's loop, which I use to get right into all these corners to make sure that all the masking tape is falling exactly where it should be, right in all the corners, right in all the door jambs, all down, and make sure that all of the masking tape is pushed down flat into each other. The other tool that I use a lot is my ordinary magnifying headband. So between those two I can get it really accurate, but it does kind of drain you, and my eyes are actually quite hurting, to be honest with you, so I'm glad it's over because I need to have a rest. I also use the box art. This is an extremely good aid to get all the marking in the correct position. Also the box art on the front is very good, and I've got a very helpful overhead drawing as well. And I'm also using obviously the water slides for the main spacings and widths of everything. So the way that I do it is I actually get my caliper, and then I take my ruler, open up my caliper and zero my caliper against my ruler like that. So once I've got my caliper exactly to zero of my ruler, I'll then open up the caliper to the width of a masking line that I want. So let's go for 1mm just there. That's close enough, you get the idea. So I can lock it off then at 1mm. Then what I do is I lay my ruler over my masking tape, bring my caliper to the edge of the ruler and also to the edge of the masking tape, get it right on both ends, and then with a very sharp scalpel I come down and I'll cut my masking tape. I then pick it up with my scalpel, or hook the corner with my scalpel, pick it up with my tweezer, and then I'll lay it down onto the body like that, and then with a toothpick I'll then run the masking tape where I want it. Now my toothpicks, what I do with these is I sharpen them right up to a very sharp edge. Now that does two things. First of all, I can use the flat side of the toothpick to run over the edge of the masking tape to push it down onto the body. I can then use the pointy part to go right inside the door jambs to get the masking tape right inside the door jambs, and I can use the side of the toothpick, then the sharp sides, to go right in these corners where the two pieces of masking tape overlay, so you don't get a bleed coming off of this line and underneath there and out the other side. You can get right in there with the side of the toothpick and get it really tight, and that's where I mostly use my jeweler's loop, so I can actually see exactly where the masking tape is sticking up or lying down. So what I did in all the louvers, I used my 20 times loop to go into every single louver, and I can actually see if the masking tape is right on the bottom of the car or it's hovering above the surface. You can't see it with your naked eye, but with a 20 times loop you can see it, and by using the loop you can actually stop all the bleeding and you get this really nice sharp edge. So as you see, I've masked off the whole of the area here where I'm going to put a water slide decal, and again I've used my toothpick to come right up the side of this masking. I can go down each side, I can come around all around the top of that air scoop on the roof, all down these corners here, get it all really tight. I've also masked off all the little lines individually on this louver on the back, so all those lines have to be the right width and in the right place. In terms of width, the middle line here is 1mm wide, and the two outer lines, or the rest of them for the most part, so this one's 1mm, these ones here are 1.5 mm, all cut like I showed you and all laid down like I showed you using my tweezers and toothpicks. Very useful tool. So the way I get all my spacing for all these masks is I use my compass with 2 spikes on it. I've replaced the lead with a spike. So what I do with that, let's say I want to get the width over here, what I'll do is I will take my water slides, I will bring my compass up to the water slide and I will measure the width of that particular part of the decal, and I'll bring it up to my body and I'll check that the line that I've laid is the right width. And if it isn't, what I do is I take these small pieces of masking tape that I've folded in half, so they're only sticky on one side, and I'll make a note of how wide or narrow that gap is, and I'll lay my little sticky tab just on the side there, I can lift off this particular line all the way back to where it pivots and then lay it back down right up against the edge of this little marker, and then I can double check again until it's correct. When it's correct, I can take away my little marker and I can pop it back on the rear quarter there for the next job. And that's how I go around and get all the spacing. So again, if I wanted to get the spacing of this line here, I would come down to where it references on the water slide. I would measure it, offer it up to make sure it's right, and if it's not, I take my little marker, I lay my marker down, having made a mental note of how wide or narrow it is, adjusted for the little marker, peel off this line, lay it back down right up against the marker, double check, and I can get my toothpick on the flat side. Once it's in the correct position, push it into that little in that little line there to make sure it's all nicely down, and I can carry it on along the flat panel, and then when it's all down, I can rub it all down like that, and then once I'm happy, I can take off my marker, stick it back on my rear quarter for the next marking, and that's how I go around using my compass as a guide for all the widths, and I use my toothpick to get it all inside the little recesses. And I've actually used a little bit of liquid mask inside some of the really difficult masking, because the white intersects into what will be green on this part here with a very tiny little hook right on the very edge. That would be incredibly hard to mask with tape, so I've cut the tape short, tucked it in with my toothpick, so pushed it right down tight, and then I filled the center dot with liquid mask because it actually works a lot better. So now I've got all the masking done. What I need to do now is block off and mask off so I can spray the green, then I can block off again so I can mask the red, and then I can take all the masking tape off, run a black line around the skirt and a black line around the windows. So this is where we're at as of now. Pretty much all of the bulk painting is now finished, apart from obviously the lacquer coat. So as you can see, we've got the A all in the side there. Side skirts are done. Green band on the front is done along with the front skirt. Other side the same. And the roof and everything else is pretty much done. Everything all lines up exactly as it should. All the lines line up correctly. Windscreens are all done with a little black line, and I've also picked out the hinges and latches in silver, and these little tiny catches here and on the bonnet here. I don't think they're supposed to be like that, but I think the silver just breaks up the red a little bit and just gives it a little bit more dimension and a little bit more depth. So with all that now done, we can now turn our attentions to cutting out all the sponsor decals and getting the sponsor decals over this paint job, and then we can clear coat it. Okay, so that's all the water slides down and looking quite reasonable. I'm quite happy with these Tamiya water slides. They seem to go on really easily and they come off their paper in a really nice predictable way. So the two products I used to help them stick was the micro set and the micro sole. So the set helps to give it a bit of extra glue just in case, and the micro sole is a bit of a solvent which helps to seat the water slide down. And I used a little tiny bit of micro sole around this little part here because it does appear to go up onto the front of this scoop. That does seem to be a thing of this particular print here. It does seem to go on the back of the scoop, and I used a little bit of micro solvent across the middle of that 539 because there's a bit of a body line there, and I just wanted to get that decal to sit down tight into that groove. And then a little bit of micro sol actually on the tops of these two water slides here to run across the bottom of the sill because they kind of hook around the corner around quite a tight angle. And I had to chop these particular water slides out of the original water slide set because I'd already painted my black line and these already came on a black line, so I just needed to get rid of those, so that's why I chopped those ones out as well. So other than that, all gone quite well. So time to let this dry for about 24 hours and then we'll get some clear coat on it. Okay, I'm just about to put down some 2K clear. This particular system is by Profix and it's 50% hardener with 10% thinners, and you really must use a very high quality mask when you're laying down 2K because it's extremely poisonous. So between my really good mask and my really powerful spray booth, I'm okay for occasional use, but if you put this stuff down regularly, you really do need a full respirator that's fresh air feed and all the rest of it. But whenever you do 2K, be very careful, read all the safety precautions and make sure you do it in a vented, at least a very well ventilated area. Okay, so while the body is drying in its 2K lacquer, I think it's time to turn our attentions to the interior. So I've already had a bit of a poke around, and I've drilled a hole through this bulkhead, threaded the wires through the centre console tunnel, drilled 2 holes in the plastic either side of my brass work for the pickup wires, and I've worked out that the wires can go underneath my centre console. I can fit my rear bulkhead in, I can then fit my seat in, and then I can fit my driver and steering wheel in, and that means then I can set the driver's arms up to hold the steering wheel properly. Once I've done that, I can glue his arms in and I can get him painted, and we can start thinking about getting this interior finished. So we got the driver figure all painted up along with the steering wheel, and he's all glued in place for the final time. We've got the seat belt made up, drilled through the chair, drilled through the bulkhead, and then glued in the back of the bulkhead. We got the front carpet in place and the middle carpet along with the previously fitted rear carpet, and that's just to stop the chassis from making a bit of a noise because it's quite a drummy chassis. We've also got the front wiring harness in for the front headlights along with a little micro connector. We managed to thread the wire through the center console, comes out the back here, ready to mount to the motor and the rear lights. I've also drilled 2 rear mounting screws here and here with little countersinks, because we're not going to be using the existing rear mounts because those are going to be chopped off and turned into proper little light pods for the rear lights. I've also glued in the 2 exhausts that I'd forgotten to do previously. So all we really now need to do is get the light clusters made up for the body and get the interior for the body all in, and then we can hit the track.
And there we are. That's how I turned my standard Tamiya 1/24 scale Lancia Stratos turbo kit into a fully fledged slot car. Now, I did actually have a little bit of a helping hand with this car, as you saw, because it already comes with a motor in certain versions of the kit, and also it had all the front steering in it to start with in plastic, which I was able to copy into brass. But hopefully I readdressed the complexity a little bit by adding my own paint job, fitting the guide and making my own lighting kit, and obviously fitting in my own version of motor in the back end as well. So how does she go? She goes really, really well. Is she a BRM? No, she's not a BRM. She was never supposed to be a BRM. The whole point of doing these kits into slot cars is because kits, generally speaking, look really, really nice. Probably on balance better than slot cars, and that was the point of this, to have a car that looks fantastic, a little bit beyond what a standard slot car would look like, or does look like, but also having the added advantage of having it as a slot car. So the idea of it is just to make it look really, really pretty and have a functional car that I can enjoy driving around the track and have a fun time with it. And to that end, she goes really, really well. She is actually quite smooth on the track, although Rickard Valley is a little bit small to stretch her legs, so I wasn't able to really go for it on my own track. But in a few weeks' time, I am going to a local track where there's a massive 4-lane routed track there, and I'll be running this car on that track. So I will video that, and I'll put it up as a future short video for you to see her going at full chat. So hopefully you've enjoyed this content, and if you have, maybe you'll subscribe, and if you could hit the little bell button, that would be awesome. So until the next time, thank you very much.